Retired Marine intelligence officer and host of the Strap podcast, Hal Kempfer. Hal, great to have you this afternoon. You know, before this Alaskan summit, President Trump, he threatened these tougher sanctions on Russia. And in recent days, we've now seen the worst death toll in Ukraine since those talks in Alaska. Do you think those sanction threats will be revisited or actually carried out this time at the end of this 2-week period that the president's laid out?
Well, Kelly, tomorrow is the deadline. In fact, President Macron today came out and sort of reminded President Trump tomorrow is the deadline, Monday, and that's when you said you'd start, taking stronger action, basically implying those secondary sanctions. You can bet that at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting with Putin there, Xi there, Modi there, that they're talking about the secondary tariffs and the possibility that those could be imposed. And there's tremendous pressure, not just from European leaders, but also pressure here at home. And it's bipartisan pressure for President Trump to go ahead and impose those sanctions.
Yeah, and it is escalating rather quickly, you could argue. Now, at the same time, Gallup's noting this shift in sentiment from Ukrainians, showing that a large majority now want a negotiated end to stop the war instead of a path that has them fighting their way to a victory. So how might that tone shift weigh on any concession Zelensky may be willing to make in order to stop this violence?
In general, they want to negotiate into the war. They want the violence. They want the losses to stop. But when you start getting into specifics, every time they're polled on would you give up, the entire Donbass? Would you give up territory that Ukrainians have been defending, with blood on the battlefield? That's where you see the polls shift the other way. And they're not willing to sacrifice sovereignty of Ukrainian lands. The other thing that weighs heavily on all Ukrainians, and certainly on President Zelensky, is the fear that they come up with some sort of agreement where they end up giving up a lot, and then the Russians are sitting there poised, just waiting for, maybe President Trump to leave office or whatever, and then go into what they call the third war, which would be the third major offensive to try and sweep in and take Kyiv and basically complete the maximalist goals that President Putin set out from the very beginning.
Yeah, and it appears that's why those security guarantees that have been discussed may be so critical here. I wondered, what are your thoughts, Hal, on the president of China now welcoming Putin? Talking this conflict and the President Trump's tariffs. What is your level of alarm over this apparent growing coziness between these two leaders?
Well, it's always been there, and it's the friendship that has no bounds sort of thing. It is a strategic alliance that has been shaping, for years now, certainly, and it keeps getting closer. A lot of this, though, I'd say with the SCO, I don't discount the amount that's staged, if you will, for global opinion. When you get behind closed doors, China has got to be nervous about the idea of major sanctions or tariffs being imposed on them for importing Russian oil. Modi is already, despite his defiant rhetoric, is already starting to feel the pain of that 50% tariff that's been imposed on India for the same thing and a couple other things. And so they're feeling that threat. And I think they're concerned that despite this rapport between Putin and President Trump, that politically President Trump may just have to go ahead and pull the trigger and do something like that.
Yeah, and I'm curious, some analyzing this have said the reason why Putin continues this offensive is because he feels like he may lose leverage if he stops the fighting, that this is his only way to gain a foothold in Ukraine, expand then into Europe. What are your thoughts on some of that reasoning?
Well, it's been written about a lot, but it is very true in a macroeconomic sense that over the last year and a half, Putin has kind of painted himself in a corner where he can't really afford to stop the war. The entire Russian economy is built towards the war. He's a student of history. He saw what was happened in 1991. He saw he knows what happened in 1917. He knows that when you have a lot of angry, disgruntled veterans come home to the streets of Moscow, St. Petersburg, or the defense industry start to collapse, you have unemployed defense workers, all of which a distinct possibility if there was an end to the war itself. that is a volatile mixture and it could cause upheaval in the streets. He's seen that happen in the region. He saw it happen in Moscow in 1991. And he's certainly nervous about that because without that war, frankly, the Russian economy starts to basically fall apart.
Right, deteriorate rather quickly. I wanted to ask you also, Hal, about the latest in the war in Gaza that's raging now. You know, we've learned that the Israeli military claimed it killed a longtime Hamas spokesperson. What might the impact of this have on any future peace talks now?
Well, the impact of the spokesman Abieda being taken out, I don't think that has. It's very symbolic. I don't know if it really changes things dramatically. What I will say though is there's tremendous pressure because they're going into Gaza City. They're already the IDF is already making entry into Gaza City. You know, that is a city that before they started going in had 900,000 people. They've cut off aid to northern Gaza because, well, frankly, it's a combat zone now. But, you know, there's problems of famine and hunger throughout the region, tremendous international pressure there. So I think actually the international pressure is going to probably have more impact on what Israel does than the fact that they took out one person. And of course, they still got to explain that recent strike on a hospital where they hit it twice. And it's not quite clear why they hit that hospital, except that it killed journalists.
Yeah, some contrasting reports afterward. Hal Kempfer, we always glean so much leaning on your expertise. Thank you very much for weighing in.
Thank you, Kelly.